What happens when the necklace you gave your daughter for her 15th birthday appears around the neck of a stranger found in a desolate wasteland? 6 years after her disappearance without a trace, the gift, seemingly lost in memory, becomes the only clue. This is the journey of a father crossing the red dust of Juárez, through layers of lies and silence, to unearth a truth that the entire system has tried to bury. Ciudad Juárez in May is a parched landscape of red dust, caught between two worlds. To the north, the border full of steel barriers and the American dream. To the south, poverty, violence, and the nameless dead. In that city, on the 3rd floor of a dilapidated building that once served as military barracks, Mateo Valdez lived as silently as a door never to be opened from the inside again. That morning, he woke up early as usual, brewed coffee in his old machine, pouring some for himself and some to cool down for the stray cat that often lingered in the hallway. The small apartment barely fit an iron bed, a desk overflowing with files, and a low bookshelf filled with old investigation files, abandoned like their owner. Mateo had left the criminal investigation force nearly 4 years ago, but the habit of waking up at 5:30 a.m. and quietly shining a flashlight into every corner still hadn't left him. His current job was handling civil complaints for a local administrative office, meaning reading meaningless accusations, pressing the printer, and trying not to bother his superiors. No more badge, no more access to internal systems, and above all, no more Amalia. After the incident with the Cadena Rota task force, Broken Chain, Mateo was not only stripped of his authority, but also subjected to unofficial surveillance. Every time he tried to contact witnesses again, or search old data, he received warnings and threats, not in writing, but enough to make his wife cry after an anonymous phone call in the middle of the night. Elena, who knew better than anyone the level of ruthlessness the system could reach, was the one who decided to take their daughter away from Juárez. She was terrified by the dangers surrounding her husband's work. Mateo didn't object, because he knew if he did, both mother and daughter might not only disappear, but also be dealt with in the way he had seen in the cases he had investigated. He didn't know where they went, didn't dare to know. Elena left a note on the dining table, written in a shaky hand. "When you are truly safe, your mother and I will come back." But then, 3 months later, Mateo received news. Elena died in a car accident on a mountain road, the cause unknown. Amalia, then 17, vanished from the hospital records that same night. No body, no legal record, no contact. Mateo lived with only one belief, that his daughter was still alive. But in a world where every trace was erased, he couldn't openly search. Every action he took would be a sign, a clue for the enemy. So, he chose not to search, so as not to lead the way, not to contact, so as not to be followed, and not to give up, because there was no real giving up, as he always kept the frayed missing persons report in his wallet. While he was reading a copy when the phone rang, the screen flashed the sender's name, Luis Five, an old colleague, once a subordinate of Mateo's when he headed the human trafficking investigation team. A file was attached. Lucia Farrell, Campo Fantasma, internal warning. Mateo opened the file, and his heart involuntarily slowed. The first photo was of a young girl's body, lying face down in a wasteland of red dust, her back torn, her hands as if reaching out to someone. The death wasn't exactly recent. There were signs of time. But what made him unable to look away was the silver necklace around the girl's neck. A small pendant in the shape of an owl, its round eyes inlaid with purple stones. Mateo stood up, trembling, and walked to an old metal cabinet, pulling out a tin box containing Amalia's old things. Inside was a drawing of the pendant, commissioned by him for his daughter's 15th birthday. A unique piece. He clearly remembered engraving the words, "Siempre a tu lado," always by your side, on the back. The next photo confirmed what no one wanted to admit. The pendant Lucia was wearing had the same inscription. The coffee was cold on the table. Mateo didn't drink it. He quietly put the tin box away, put on his coat, and left the apartment without saying a word. Campo Fantasma, Ghost Field, was an abandoned wasteland located in the industrial area northeast of the city, once the proving ground for a concrete factory. Now, only rusty no trespassing signs and white sand mounds like human bones remained. Mateo stood about 20 meters from the scene, not crossing the barrier. He no longer had the authority to investigate, but his eyes didn't need a search warrant. Just a ray of sunlight shining at the right angle, he saw the round tire tracks stretching from the edge of the road to the center of the field. Another track smaller, like a drag mark. The investigation team had marked the place where Lucia's body was found with red fabric flags. But there was something they didn't mark, a scrap of paper buried under the soil. Mateo picked it up and recognized it as a production inventory sheet with the Indutex Norte logo. When Mateo returned home after leaving Campo Fantasma, he pulled out a file that had been overlooked from the old archives. List of temporary workers, March 2019. Source, Indutex Norte. This was a document he had secretly copied from a hidden source before being pushed off the investigation team that year, when Indutex was suspected of being an unofficial transit point. He had never scrutinized that list, partly because he had left the case, partly because he never thought his daughter would return to Juarez so quietly. Now, as his hand slowly traced each line of names, the name Amalia Elena 5 suddenly appeared on page 36. The record showed she was hired for the night shift, sewing workshop number. Third start date, March 5th. Note, temporary contract. No termination date. No resignation letter. Not a single update after March 22nd, exactly 3 days before she disappeared. Mateo squeezed the paper so hard that his fingers turned white. So, it was true. She had returned, had worked there, had disappeared in the same factory, and at the same time that Lucia Farrell also went missing. It wasn't just that his daughter was missing. It wasn't that he was imagining things. Amalia, the child he thought was living in another city, had quietly returned to Juarez, signing a night shift contract at the factory that was once investigated for its connection to the cartel. She had walked right into the heart of what he had fought. Mateo sat silently. His hand gripped the edge of the table, then released it, then held on again. The wind through the window stirred the old curtain, and for the first time in years, he felt time turn back. No more unit bells, no more colleagues turning away. Only a father, holding in his hand the last trace of the child who once believed her father would find her. This time, Mateo Valdez would find his daughter, at any cost, even if all that remained was a name, printed among the list of those who had been silenced. Night in Juarez was like an old scar, no longer bleeding, but always aching when the weather changed. In the narrow room of the third floor, Mateo Valdez sat in the dim light of the desk lamp, turning each page of the old files as if searching for the voice of a time when he was the one who made human traffickers tremble. But now, they lived carefree, and he was just a name deep in the personnel list of civil administration. The computer screen showed a faint recording, time-stamped 2018. A young woman's voice panting, speaking haltingly. Indutex, not a factory, a transit point. They use military vehicles. El Vado. Oh my God. There are soldiers too. Then a loud noise, the call abruptly cut off. Mateo had listened to that tape dozens of times. But this time, after Lucia's death and the appearance of the necklace, it rang like a hammer blow to the heart. Indutex, that name again. The investigation file that he had compiled for the Cadena Rota task force, a campaign to track down cross-border human trafficking routes, was still there, scattered in the yellowed documents. That year, Mateo was the lead investigator. His team had traced the routes for smuggling women from Juarez to El Paso through shell transportation companies, then selling them to forced labor camps across the border. They had come close to the end of the road. A young witness, Carmen, who survived after escaping from a camp near La Mosquitia, had testified in detail about a selection center at a textile factory. At that time, the factory's name was coded. Now Mateo was certain. It was Indutex Norte. Carmen disappeared 2 weeks after the last interrogation. No one found her body. Internal Affairs Police said she was depressed, suicidal. But Mateo knew. Those who spoke the truth in this case never disappeared on their own. Soon after, he was asked to review his conduct for exceeding authority and causing political instability. A transfer order was signed quickly, pushing him to the Civil Complaints Unit. No weapons, no team, no access to any confidential files. The night he left the Criminal Investigation Office for the last time, no one saw him off. Those who used to sit at the same investigation table now avoided his gaze. And he, in silence, simply went home, packed a few belongings, wrapping up a life that was falling apart. But now, with his daughter's safety in danger, Mateo no longer saw himself as an administrative employee. He saw himself returning with the mindset of the one who dared to tear up the superior's orders to save a child from the camp across the border. The dry season morning in Juárez always carried a distinctive smell, the smell of diesel mixed with fine dust and rusty iron. The Indutex Norte factory appeared at the end of the road, half of its metallic body still operating, the other half turned into a pile of technical wreckage gnawed by time. Mateo Valdez stood silently before the main gate, holding a file labeled Labor Complaint Inspector, Interagency Legal Procedures. A piece of paper disguising what he was really doing, returning to the place where his daughter once lived, once worked, and perhaps once was taken away. The automatic gate opened when he showed the Civil Special Agent ID. The guard, an old man with a hoarse voice and red-rimmed eyes, recognized him. "You've been here before, haven't you?" he asked, half hesitant, half curious. Mateo nodded without explanation. Both knew no one would dig deep into that memory. He passed through the planned grounds, now cracked by drought, and entered the main corridor of Workshop C, where temporary workers were usually received. The air inside was thick with the smell of machine oil and coarse fabric fibers. The sound of industrial sewing machines beat steadily like a strained heartbeat. Mateo stopped by the information board, where the current year's work shifts were posted. From March 2019 onwards, all data was encrypted. He pretended to note something, then walked towards the old storage room, a concrete room with an iron mesh door, unlocked but covered in dust. He opened the creaking door, walking through each file cabinet, his eyes scanning each number. A row of yellow files, labeled Night Shift March 2019, was marked with black ink. Mateo quietly took a photo, even though he knew it wouldn't give him much. But for someone like him, tracking the traces was instinct, like a sniffer dog smelling the scent of time. He left the storage room, wandering through the side hallway, which led to the women's locker room. No one was there at this hour, but in the dim light, he saw a wooden chair placed against the wall. An old chair, the backrest tilted, something a child would use to prop their feet up. He recognized it. Mateo walked over, sat down. Not a word. His hand rested on the seat, gently stroking it. Each cracked wooden fiber, each peeling paint, as if recording the image of Amalia sitting here, washing her face after the night shift, taking off her gloves. He took out a handkerchief, wiped away the dirt, then stood up, leaving without a sound. The workers' dormitory was about 2 blocks from the factory. A row of level 4 brick rooms, each no more than 9 square meters, sharing a common toilet and an open-air kitchen. This place had no signs, nor did anyone ask for identification. Mateo sat down on the doorstep of the end of the row, touching the rusty railing. His hand reached into his coat pocket, pulling out an old silver necklace, the pendant in the shape of an owl. Through his connections, he had obtained it from the evidence of Lucia's case and always carried it with him as if always holding the hope of finding his daughter. The woman looked up. Her eyes drooped, then widened. She stubbed out her cigarette, her voice choked. That owl. She wore it every day. She pinned it to her collar, as if afraid someone would snatch it. "You're her father, aren't you?" Mateo didn't answer. He just nodded, as if confirming a wound tearing open again. She brought the cigarette to her mouth, took a puff, then exhaled, as if reaffirming some memory. That girl, she was good, but she didn't know fear. "Unlike us," she said, her voice even and slow. Once the supervisor touched her, she slapped him in the face. We froze, thinking she would be fired. But he just looked at her, smiling strangely. From that day on, she started getting called for private shifts. Mateo swallowed hard. "What's your name?" "Maritza," she replied. "I worked the same shift with her throughout that spring." They sat silently for a moment, only the sound of the wind and the distant sound of industrial vehicles passing by. Mateo asked, "Do you remember the last time you saw her?" Maritza stubbed out the cigarette, her eyes looking into the distance. "Yes. Saturday night. Night shift. About 1 a.m, she got on a black bus without license plates. The bus parked behind the factory, not through the main gate." Mateo felt his heart tighten. "Are you sure?" "I know that bus. It never took anyone home. No lights inside the bus, the windows tinted dark. The driver wore sunglasses. His face had a long scar on his left cheek. I never saw him again." Mateo raised his hand to his forehead, sighing. Maritza stood up, walked into the room, then came back. In her hand was a small piece of paper, folded very carefully. She gave it to him, her voice low. "I cleaned out her locker a few weeks after she disappeared. Found this. I didn't know if I should keep it. Now, maybe you should." Mateo opened the piece of paper. The handwriting was shaky, but still clear. "Dad, if I don't come back, don't forgive them." On the way out of the dormitory area, Mateo encountered a garbage truck passing by. It rolled slowly, its shape no different from Maritza's description of the black car that night. No logo, dark window glass, silent iron shell. He stopped, standing silently watching it disappear behind the row of factories. His hand still clutching the piece of paper, now wet with sweat. Hope and fear, two things that seemed opposite, choked him at the same time. Mateo didn't know if his daughter was still alive or not, but he knew for sure one thing. If he didn't follow it to the end, he would never find the lost part of himself. And what made him feel the coldest was the last sentence of Maritza before they parted. "You know, when she got on the bus, she still turned back to look once. Her face wasn't scared. She just looked like she knew you would come. But you didn't come, did you?" Mateo didn't answer. Because how could he tell her that? Yes, he didn't come. But now he was here, and he wouldn't leave until he found his daughter, or those who killed her bowed their heads. Mateo Valdez had once told his former students, in human trafficking cases, the real clues weren't in the victims, but in the things that seemed most trivial. Vehicle maintenance slips, fuel bills, cameras that broke down at just the right time. Now, he was reapplying his own lessons, like an old wolf following the old blood trail, this time the blood of his own child. Based on Maritza's story and Amalia's handwritten note, Mateo returned to analyze the traffic camera data around Indutex Norte, especially the road behind the workshop, where the night bus once picked up Amalia. He no longer had access to the city system, but an old colleague from the technical team, engineer Higuera, owed him a favor from the day his wife escaped from El Paso. He didn't ask why, just sent him straight 2 clips extracted from the old camera. In the dim streetlights of the night of March 9, 2019, a bus without numbers appeared in the same location, at the same time, twice, 7 days apart. The same driver, fat, wearing sunglasses, his face with a scar stretching from his temple to his chin. The car had no license plate in the front. The back was just an empty piece of iron, as if it never belonged to an official company. Mateo sat motionless in front of the screen, then exhaled a long breath. like someone who had just confirmed a nightmare that he had tried not to believe was true. He needed stronger help from Higuera. He quickly got up, grabbed his coat, and went to the city transport office. The city transport office was located in an old 3-story yellow-painted building where paperwork was piled high like a city wall. Under the guise of checking working conditions in industrial areas, Mateo entered the records room, pretending to search for information about night shift drivers. The one who helped him was none other than Higuera, now a vehicle fleet supervisor. Mateo handed over a picture of the car. This license plate is missing. But what route did this car use to run? Higuera frowned, examining the photo under a magnifying glass. Not in the current list, but looking at the paint color and wheel rim. This is a domestic model of Logística del Norte, an old industrial transport company closed since 2020. Mateo remembered the name, not officially investigated, but once listed as suspected of being linked to the Sierra cartel. "Are there any records still kept?" he asked. Higuera shook his head. "It's been deleted, but maybe this will help." He hurried to his desk and pulled out a side drawer, taking out a technical maintenance slip. "Here, the vehicle chassis number matches. Last repaired at Garra dos Hermanas. This, you didn't hear it from me." Mateo nodded. No need to say more. Garra dos Hermanas nestled behind an old gas station. No signs, no receptionist. Only the smell of burning oil and the sound of metal hammering echoed steadily. A silver-haired mechanic named Tonio recognized the chassis number immediately. "I remember that car. It was brought in to fix the electrical system afterwards. The camera broke, told me to take it out." "Tonio, was there anything strange when repairing that car?" Mateo asked, his voice hoarse. Tonio hesitated. "When I removed it, I saw that the camera wire was cut with a knife, not broken by wear. I asked, and the driver smiled faintly. That's not needed." Then he pushed a $100 bill into my hand. "Tonio, do you still have that camera?" The mechanic sniffed, pointing to a pile of old things. "I still have it, but it probably can't be saved. It's been smashed." Mateo walked over, flipping through the pile of components. In it was a camera lens with a broken glass, but the connection was still there. He carefully wrapped it in a plastic bag, as if lifting a piece of memory that had never been released. The bar La Torcida was located near the industrial bus station, where drivers often gathered after the night shift. Mateo arrived first, choosing a table in the dark corner, turning his back to the door. He ordered a bottle of mezcal and 2 glasses, even though he knew he would only drink one. On the table was a flyer printed with the old Logística del Norte logo, the kind of paper only those who used to drive for that company would notice. About 15 minutes later, a figure slowly walked in, looking around. He had prematurely gray hair, a dull brown skin because of the sun, and the gait of someone with nothing left to lose. Cañas, now a freelance container driver, but used to be a night shift driver for the route no one dared to name. Mateo poured the liquor, pushing the glass towards him. "I need you to remember something. 3 years ago, black bus, no license plate, running the night shift for Indutex." Cañas sneered. "I don't remember everyone I've ever carried." Mateo placed on the table the blurred photo from the camera, the driver wearing sunglasses, scarred face. "Do you know him?" Cañas's face hardened. The liquor still hadn't touched his lips, but sweat had already dotted his forehead. "I didn't do the same trip, but I used to see his car parked behind the factory. No lights, no horn. Carrying the girls. No one asked their names." "Where to?" "El Vado." Mateo suppressed a shudder. "Do you know that place?" Cañas looked around, then drained his glass as if taking courage. "We just took them to the gate. The greeters were soldiers. One night, I looked through the rearview mirror. One of them looked at me like she was drowning. Was that her?" Mateo didn't answer, but his eyes didn't hide the fear. Cañas lowered his head, his voice choked. "We didn't know what happened after that. No one dared to ask. Salary was paid in cash. No papers, no orders. There's only one thing I remember. He looked up. That girl. She looked like she knew who was watching, and she didn't plead for help. She just looked straight at me as if to say, "Don't pretend you don't see anything." That night, Mateo drove home alone. No radio, no lights in the car. In his coat pocket was the broken camera lens. In his head was the image of Amalia sitting on the bus, silently looking through the rearview mirror, not pleading for help, not begging, just looking straight into the driver's eyes. No one knew what she was thinking at that moment, but Mateo knew. She didn't need to be saved. She just needed someone not to turn away. And if he had been the one to turn away, then now, he would be the one who wouldn't stop, wherever this road might lead. The wind howled through the barren land northwest of Juárez as darkness covered El Vado, an old military facility withdrawn from the defense map since 2009, but always guarded. This place, according to public documents, was an unused training area. Words of concealment, hiding something no one wanted to dig up. Although he had never been allowed access, he clearly remembered how to enter, because he had been stopped at the camp gate 5 years ago, when he was still working in the criminal team. Mateo Valdez parked about 2 kilometers from the side gate entrance. He wore a gray dust cloak, a backpack containing maps, an old thermal camera used in special operations, and a roll of infrared signal receiving cable. Tonight, he wasn't just looking for traces. He came to hear the echoes of the hidden, the screams that would never be voiced. El Vado appeared like a war relic. Cracked brick warehouses, rusty guard towers, weeds growing around old armored vehicle bunkers. But under the pale moonlight, Mateo didn't see the decay. He saw the wounds being tried to cover with a layer of time dust. He set up camp hidden under a rock crevice near the east wall, where the logistics warehouse used to be. In the dark, he attached the thermal camera to the stand, scanning each corner of the camp. Infrared rays manifested like illusions. No living creatures, but there were ground indentations, arc-shaped, just like Maritza's description of where the vehicles stopped. Mateo followed the old trail leading into the concrete yard behind. Under the gravel and rubble, there were still deep tire marks, not the type of civilian vehicles, but military heavy vehicles. A tire track stopped abruptly, leaving a skid mark. Mateo knelt down, reaching out to follow. In the crevices of the rocks, he picked up a piece of nylon rope, the type used to tie hands, still clinging to a few strands of hair and dry red marks. He didn't say a word, just put the sample into a bag with tweezers, then proceeded to the warehouse to the north, where in the old map was marked as isolation area. The door was locked from the outside, but the hinges were rusted, easily pried open with tools. Inside was dark as ink. The smell of burning and rusty iron choked him. The flashlight shone through the walls, scribbles with fingernails carved into the lime. Mama. Ayuda, 25/3. Then he stopped in front of a wall at the end, blackened with smoke, as if there had been a fire. On it, the words were carved more clearly than the others, sharp as dried blood. I am not a number. Mateo placed his hand on the inscription. His fingers glided lightly over each scratch. Under the dust, there was still a red streak, maybe blood, maybe paint. His voice whispered, almost praying, "How many children have written like this before being erased from the world?" The next morning, he sent the hair and blood samples to an old colleague in El Paso, now working at a private forensic center. Less than 20 hours later, the preliminary results came back. DNA matched Lucia Farrell, the girl found at Campo Fantasma. Mateo sat in the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Now he knew for sure. Lucia had been here, and if she had ever come to El Vado, then Amalia had also passed through this place. On the way out of the camp, Mateo didn't take the old route. An instinct told him he was being watched. Every step left an echo in the wind, the echo that an old policeman could recognize no matter how good the watcher was. And then he saw it, a black SUV parked at the turn to the main road. Tinted car windows, new license plates. But the style was unchanged, simple, threatening, and anonymous. Mateo didn't go on. He turned the steering wheel, reversing into the forest road, driving around a side alley near the hill, sticking close in the bushes, then stopped in the thick shade of the old ammunition depot. From his hiding place, he used the lens to zoom in and photograph the license plate, PZK4298. Through the glass, a man wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, sat still, not smoking, not surfing the phone, just waiting. "They're checking me," he muttered. "They know I came." Mateo sent the photo and license plate to a reliable contact in Chiapas, someone who specializes in tracking fake license plates in cartel-operated areas. "Find me this person. Absolutely keep it secret." That night, he returned to the apartment, washed the bloodstains on his gloves, wiped the thermal camera, and put everything neatly into a locked metal box. In the drawer next to it was an old photo. Amalia standing on the embankment, her hair flying, her smile slightly curved. He looked for a long time, then put the photo down next to the newly collected sample. On the table, an open notebook, each page recording each step he took, each detail he found. On the latest page, he wrote, "El Vado, confirmed transit point. Lucia, present. Amalia, high probability of being brought to. Signs of the military, indirect. Next, driver, plate P, ZK4298. Surveillance has begun." He closed the notebook. The night wind blew through the window, carrying the smell of dust, the smell of a land that was never cleaned of blood. Mateo wasn't scared. What he felt was a simmering anger, the anger of a father with nothing left to lose. And this time, silence wasn't acceptance. It was revenge that had been waiting too long to explode. Mateo Valdez parked his car in front of the local military headquarters, once a civil military coordination branch, now converted into an administrative office for former officers. He didn't come here according to the official schedule. The temporary entry card he wore on his chest only allowed him to sit for an hour in the reception area, but Mateo knew how to make himself sit longer. The reason he gave: surveying the retirement records of former officers who participated in coordinated operations with the judiciary. In the list he compiled himself, the only name in bold was Teniente José Guerra. Guerra used to be the commanding officer in charge of logistics for the Western region, including El Vado, a name once respected within the organization until he suddenly requested early retirement at the end of 2019, a few months after Amalia went missing. Mateo was led into a small reception room, ebony wooden table, creaking ceiling fan, an automatic coffee machine rusted on the side. Less than 10 minutes later, Guerra walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, his civilian military uniform ironed straight, his eyes more dim than before, but not yet lost their vigilance. "Mateo Valdez," he said slowly, as if checking his memory. "I thought you had switched to the civilian side forever." Mateo smiled faintly. "Once you've seen enough filth, you usually have to sit down and rewrite it by hand." They shook hands, cold and solid. No one trusted anyone. The conversation began with harmless things: the food distribution campaign during the pandemic, the dissolution of interagency regiments, cooperation reports between engineers and industrial factories. But Mateo didn't come here to write history. He opened the file, pulling out an old photocopy contract, Industrial Transport Protection Contract, between Logistica del Norte and Support Battalion Number 7, March 2018. Guerra glanced at it, frowning. "I didn't approve any contracts in 2018. I was transferred to El Rosario for 3 months at that time." He looked closely again. "These seals, fake. My unit doesn't use that blue ink." Mateo was silent, just nodding, just as he thought. Someone was using Guerra's name and the military's name to cover up an illegal transportation operation. He continued to flip through a a blurred photo from the thermal camera at El Vado. In it, the silhouettes of two girls being dragged from the car. One of them was Amalia, the other was Lucia Farrell. Guerra stiffened. Not a word for almost a minute. His eyes didn't blink, as if seeing the past manifesting itself. "Where did you find this?" "Right where you used to command," Matteo replied, his voice even. "I don't think I need to say more." Guerra stood up, turning to face the window. "You shouldn't pull me back in," he said, not angry, not scared, just desperate. "You used to command that place. At least one of these girls used to live in your barracks. Don't you think you have a responsibility?" Guerra didn't turn back. "I feel lucky to have escaped. And you, if you continue, you won't just lose your daughter." Matteo still stood still, his eyes not leaving Guerra's face. "You know exactly what you're hiding," he said slowly, his voice calmly scary. "But you also know, if I stop, more people will have to die." Guerra looked at him for a long time, then turned away, took his hat, saying as if speaking to himself, "You never know when you're the last one keeping silent, until all the voices are gone." The door closed behind Guerra without another word. That night, Matteo returned to the apartment. The sky darkened quickly, as if someone hastily pulled the curtain to hide something. On the desk, a brown envelope was already there. No sending address, no recipient name. Someone had put it in through the door slot. Inside was a mini recording tape, the type used in surveillance equipment. He turned on the machine. A man's voice, hoarse and greasy, rang through the noise. "The cop who lost his kid. Tell him to sit still, he's crossing the red line." No laughter, no public threats, just a story. But it sounded like a knife slicing through the spine. Matteo stopped the machine, squeezing the recording tape so hard that the plastic shell cracked. He stood up, walked to the window. The whole city under his feet shone like a network of glowing nerves, each light a soul, a secret, a plea for help. "So it started," he whispered. From now on, he was no longer just a father looking for his child. He had returned to the old war, but this time no badge, no teammates, no law protecting his back. Only the truth, and the deadly silence that was covering it like a steel net. The very next morning, Matteo called El Paso. "Prepare the file, both the photo and the recording. I need an international channel to receive it. Domestic law can't help us anymore." The person on the other end hesitated. "Are you sure? Once you submit it, everything will be out of your hands." Matteo looked back at the photo of his daughter on the table. Amalia's eyes were still looking at him from somewhere far away, waiting. "I don't need to steer the wheel. I just need them not to be buried again." The person on the other end was silent for a moment, then hung up. Matteo stuffed all the documents into a locked bag, including the recording, Lucia's DNA evidence, and a copy of the military's fake contract. And in the document box was also the old camera lens, the component Matteo had found at the repair shop. An acquaintance engineer in El Paso helped him decode the data remaining in the cache memory. The clip was less than 10 seconds long, the image shaky, the angle tilted. But it was enough to see the silhouette of a girl being pushed into the car in the dark, her hands resisting. The pendant flashed silver. The owl. Matteo paused the image. No need to be clear. He knew it was Amalia. For the first time in years, he felt he was no longer alone. But he also knew, the closer he got to the light, the more the darkness would startle and turn its head. And tonight, it wouldn't just knock on the door. It would break in. El Paso was no longer like in Matteo Valdez's memory. In previous years, he used to come here to exchange information, extradite criminals, find missing people. Building number 19 Mesa Street, the small office of the Rights Watch Inter-American Organization, stood quietly in the bustling commercial area. A faded sign, an American flag fluttering on the roof. Matteo entered, a backpack on his shoulder, clutching an aluminum box containing evidence files. In the waiting room, he recognized Gregory Haynes at first glance. His hair was grayer than before, his vest old, but his eyes were still sharp. Haynes used to be a military prosecutor, then left the industry because of disagreement over a case of prisoner torture. He switched to human rights activities, specializing in handling cross-border human trafficking cases, and was one of the few people Mateo still trusted. "Well, Valdez," Haynes shook hands, a forced smile. "I knew this day would come." "And I knew you wouldn't turn your back," Mateo replied. They sat in a closed room, only a recorder and a bottle of water. Mateo laid each part of the file on the table, copies of thermal images from El Vado, DNA test samples matching Lucia Farrell, a recording from the cartel, Maritza's handwritten testimony, and an excerpt from the camera showing the car. Finally, he took out a set of financial statements from Inditex, the part he found when reviewing the factory's internal data. There was a transfer from 2018 to a non-profit organization in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, Fundación Luz y Futuro, Light and Future Foundation, which Haynes recognized immediately. "These guys are just a front," mentioned in an Interpol report last year, tied to 2 forced labor camps for women. Mateo looked straight into Haynes's eyes. "My daughter went missing in 2019. I believe she was transferred to Honduras through that route." Haynes nodded, tapping on his computer. "If we have a Mexican victim who was forcibly transferred across the border and is present in the cartel's area of control, I can request an investigation under the International Human Rights Clause." "How long?" "Not as long as you think. We need to verify identity and put it on the urgent list. Do you have a photo of your daughter?" Mateo opened his wallet, pulling out a small photo with frayed edges. Amalia, 17 years old, smiling and holding the silver owl pendant. Haynes took it, his eyes gleaming with a genuine pity. "Okay," he said. "I will submit the entire file to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights within 48 hours." They left the room at dusk. The dry, cold El Paso wind blew through the street. Haynes saw him off at the door, holding his old friend's hand tightly. "Mateo, you know this won't stop at the border, right?" "I don't need it to stop anywhere," he replied, "as long as it goes further than the mouths that have been forced silent." Haynes watched him for a long time, then said softly, "Then be prepared. There will be people who want to cut this stream before it becomes a wave." Mateo didn't answer. He turned his back, stepped out onto the doorstep. In the street, sunlight reflected from the asphalt road, making everything seem to flow. Mateo stopped, rummaging in his pocket for an old pack of cigarettes, something he carried not to smoke, but to remember. The pack was torn, the inside empty. He squeezed it tightly in his hand, like a silent promise. Since Amalia disappeared, he had quit smoking. But today, the craving didn't return. What clung to him was no longer smoke, but the image of the girls on the bus. No names, no papers, no returning. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something was shifting, not outside, but within himself. A connection had opened. A flow began to leak through the cracks of the system, and when the water had seeped in, no cement could stop it from finding its way to the light. At dawn, Ciudad Juárez was still asleep. But the phone in Mateo Valdez's apartment was not. It rang 3 times, then stopped, as if the caller was also hesitant. The 4th time he picked up. A man's voice, an American English accent, deep and urgent. "Mr. Valdez? This is Interpol Central America. We need you to verify someone." Mateo squeezed the phone tightly. "Who is it, sir?" "She identifies herself as Amalia Valdez," and a pause. "She refuses to say anything more, only says she will answer after meeting her father." The blood in him stopped flowing for a moment, then rushed back like a tide. No questions popped out. Mateo just said, "I need to know where she is." "United Nations Victim Support Center in Guatemala. We rescued her from a forced labor camp near the Honduras border during an operation last week." He nodded, even though he knew the person on the other end couldn't see. "I'll be there right away." A small chartered flight carried him across the border that day, funded by a special support branch of Interpol. The plane shook, the silver steel body gleaming under the tropical sun. Mateo sat by the window, saying nothing. In his heart, memories swirled like a photo blown by the wind. He remembered the last time he took Amalia to high school, her hair tied high, her backpack smaller than her. She ran out of his hand, turned back to smile, and disappeared into the iron gate. An everyday scene, but it became the last time he saw his child as a carefree kid. In a short, fitful dream, as the plane glided over the Guatemalan plateau, Mateo saw that moment again. But this time, Amalia didn't turn back. The victim center was a simple beige building, nestled in a quiet residential area south of the city. No guards, no weapons, only the heavy silence of places that had witnessed too much suffering. A young Belgian employee greeted him, taking him through 2 layers of light security checks. The atmosphere here was very strange, both thick with emotion and almost invisible. People didn't cry here. They just looked at each other for a long time. "She's in room number 6, the employee said softly. "She's been sitting there for almost 3 hours. No one dares to go in." Mateo nodded. He walked over, stopping in front of the off-white door. The door opened slowly. The room was small, the light pale yellow, a low tea table and 2 wooden chairs. She sat there, head bowed, clutching a worn terry towel tightly. Her hair was cut short, messy, and covering her forehead. Her face was very thin, her skin pale with signs of sun exposure. Amalia. She looked up when she heard the door. The eyes of the 2 father and daughter met. No tears, no first words, just a moment that lasted like a lifetime, when all the memories, both love and anger, both hope and despair, were wrapped in one look. Then, like a child from years ago, Amalia stood up, took step towards him. No rush, no weeping. Just reached out, gently touching her father's shirt, as if to make sure he wasn't an illusion. "I thought you weren't looking for me anymore," she whispered. Mateo swallowed hard, then shook his head slightly, he said, his voice almost trembling. "How could I ever abandon you?" Amalia said nothing more. She sat down, while Mateo stood there, looking at his child for a long time, as if counting every wrinkle on her face, every trace of stolen time. Finally, he walked over, placed his hand on his daughter's head, gently stroking each strand of short hair, his hand trembling, afraid that if he was too strong, she would shatter like pottery. They sat together for more than an hour, not many words. She told intermittently about the night she was beaten at El Vado, about the weeks she was locked in a container, about the car that took 3 girls across the border, then the years she was held in the mountains of Honduras, where the girls were used as property, and silence was the only currency that had value. "Some nights I dream that I'm still in the house," she said. "You're sitting outside the door, smoking. Mom's calling me for dinner. I don't dare to open my eyes, because I know if I wake up, I won't be back there anymore." Mateo squeezed his daughter's hand. "Where you are now doesn't matter." She nodded, her eyes red, but not crying. "Lucia saved me. She said, you wouldn't give up." She was right. Outside the window, the sky began to change. Mateo stood up, looking at the sunlight streaming through the trees. "Let's go home," he said. "Where to?" "Wherever you want. No one can take you away anymore." For the first time, Amalia smiled, light, thin, but real. And in the middle of that center, among those who had never returned, the 2 Valdez father and daughter somehow returned. International Court of Human Rights, San Jose, Costa Rica, the ivory-white building that resembled an old library. But that day, the atmosphere was as tense as a steel wire. Outside, reporters from major news agencies set up cameras, connected antennas, and broadcast signals around the world. Inside, The speaker's voice calling the names of the witnesses echoed in the long hallway paved with marble. On the dock, 4 men stood neatly inside the security glass frame. Teniente José Guerra, 2 executives of the Indutex Norte factory, and the former mayor of Ciudad Juárez, who once spoke about urban order at the inauguration of the transport route in 2018. Now no one dared to look straight at the witness benches. A 5th person was absent. Lieutenant Federico Salinas, a federal police officer, committed suicide in a military jail cell shortly after being summoned. 2 days earlier, he sent a short email to his wife. "I used to think keeping silent was protection, but silence has killed too many children." The operation to break the case, codenamed Luna Oscura, Dark Moon, exploded like fire spreading through paper. From the evidence Mateo sent through Haynes, international organizations traced the chain of finances, fake contracts, and especially the system of transporting people run by the cartel with the tacit assistance of the military. A series of satellite maps were made public, forced labor camps for women scattered around the Honduras forest area, each camp located near military logistics routes. In some photos, one could clearly see barbed wire fences, guard posts, and bus parking lots. The blind spots of the legal system were illuminated. The Interpol spokesperson said before the media, "We have never witnessed an organized exploitation structure that is so cruel, coordinated by the very people who swore to protect the public." Amalia Valdez sat in the witness seat with her newly cut hair, wearing a white shirt and no makeup. Before a panel of 5 international judges, she recounted, piece by piece, her journey. From the Indutex factory, the night bus without plates, the El Vado camp, then the border crossing in a container, and the 3 years without a name in Honduras. She didn't cry, didn't condemn. Her voice was even and clear, like a living report that people couldn't ignore. We were taught to be silent, but silence is never salvation. Beside her, a video recording was presented, taken from the thermal camera that Mateo had found. In it, Lucia Farrell pulled a girl from the bus, fell, and disappeared into the darkness. That video, like a condemnation that didn't need translation. When asked to be present at the sentencing hearing, Mateo refused. He was staying in Guatemala, continuing to support at the victim center. When he heard about the sentence, 30 years in prison for each defendant, along with compensation and international arrest warrants for 6 suspects who had fled, he only sent a single line to the press. "Justice is not for registration, but to end silence." A week after the trial, the last video was released. The sealed containers were opened in a new rescue operation. Each girl stepped out, dazzled in the sunlight. Some sobbed, some stood still, some sat down because the light was too strong. They didn't need to say anything. Their very presence was the greatest statement. We are alive. In another hallway, a reporter asked Haynes, "Does Mateo Valdez deserve to be honored as a hero?" Haynes just shook his head, smiling slightly. He would hate that question. He wasn't looking for a medal. He was looking for his daughter. But everyone knew, thanks to an ordinary father, no badge, no military rank, that a silent system had been forced to speak. A wall had fallen, and for the first time, the light didn't ask permission to shine into the darkness. It flooded in, like returning life to what had been buried. 2 years passed as if Mateo Valdez's life had changed form. The small town where he and Amalia were living wasn't named on tourist maps. It was located between sugarcane forests and red soil hills of southern Mexico, far from all the throbbing sounds of the city, far from even the ghost of the gray buildings in Juárez. Their house was on the edge of a dirt road, a sloping, corrugated iron roof, a small porch hanging with baskets of dried onions and a few bunches of corn. In the morning, Amalia got up early to water the plants. Mateo chopped wood, fixed pipes, read letters from human rights organizations, where he still played the role of unpaid advisor. In the house, there was no TV, only a radio and thick notebooks recording the cases of missing people that people still silently sent in through the mail. Amalia had changed, but not forced. She volunteered to teach at the elementary school an hour's walk away, teaching math, reading, writing, and telling stories. Once, a student asked, "Ms. Amalia, were you a policewoman?" She laughed. "Number but her father used to be." Then she looked out the window where Mateo was sitting fixing a broken chair. His eyes met hers, neither said anything, but something was always clear. On September 27th, the weather was gentle like a damp cloth covering the chest. Both father and daughter woke up early, packed food into cloth bags, then set off north, returning to Campo Fantasma. The journey took nearly 8 hours by bus and 3 hours on foot. But Mateo didn't complain, and Amalia was used to trips for which she couldn't name the emotion. The wasteland hadn't changed much. Weeds were overgrown, white sand still covered it, and the broken telephone pole in the left corner hadn't been removed. This place used to be a temporary grave, where Lucia Farrell was found. Now it had a different name, El Muro de las Quebradas, the Wall of the Broken. They brought a new headstone, carved from limestone, heavy and rough. Mateo dug the foundation himself, erected it, attached it with dry mixed cement from the stones around it. On the headstone was the inscription, "They were taken, but we brought them back." Amalia said nothing. She just put a bunch of dried wildflowers at the foot of the headstone, purple branches growing along the country road, sun-dried for weeks. Mateo came up behind her, his hand resting lightly on his daughter's shoulder. For the first time in 6 years, he could do what he hadn't been able to do. At El Vado, on the bus, on the night he only received a missing person call. She looked up, touching his hand. A gentle movement, no need for words. When they turned away, the sun had just touched the peak. The wind blew harder, sand flying across their faces. On the way back, they passed an old rest stop, where a group of young women were sitting waiting for the bus. One of them, hair dyed red, wearing headphones, looked at Amalia and nodded. "Are you the one in the news?" Amalia paused slightly. "No," she said softly. "I'm just the one who came back." Arriving home, Mateo turned on the radio. The news echoed softly. An international human rights organization publishes a report on the decline of human trafficking routes after the historic lawsuit 2 years ago. He turned it down. No need to hear the details. He knew he had witnessed what had never been said, and now had become the language of justice. Amalia cooked dinner. The yellow light in the kitchen reflected on the wall, creating the shadows of the two father and daughter sitting opposite each other, like two parallel streaks of time, finally intersecting in the light. "Dad," she said, "have you ever regretted it?" Mateo chewed slowly, then shook his head. "Only regret not being afraid sooner." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of losing you. Afraid of the silence. Afraid that we had become accustomed to not seeing what needed to be seen." Amalia nodded. "I was also afraid that I would only remain in memory." "No way," he said, pouring more water. "You've returned, and you're not a memory. You're a witness." That night, they didn't close the window. The moon rose full as a promise. The wind blew through the porch, carrying the smell of earth, the smell of sugar cane, and the smell of a new beginning. The story doesn't end with blood, with hatred, or a sentence. It ends with a hand placed on a shoulder, a presence, a return. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in sirens. It comes when a child steps out of the darkness and no longer has to walk alone. You must have passed through some injustice in your life, not because you didn't see it, but because sometimes stopping to look straight at it hurt more than turning away. If you have read this far, perhaps you also understand the feeling of a father who was forced to choose silence. Not because he didn't love his child, but because he loved too much, so he couldn't risk it one more time. The story of Mateo and Amalia is not just the journey to find a missing person. It's the journey to confront a system that has let hundreds, thousands of voices be swallowed in darkness. We retell this story, based on real cases recorded in the border region for many years. The names of characters, locations, and details have been changed to protect the identity of those involved and to ensure that the truth, even if incomplete, is still raised with kindness. If this story has touched you, please share it via WhatsApp with a friend. Maybe it's someone who has lost themselves in silence. Maybe it's someone who needs a reason to believe that justice, though late, can still come. Or simply, they just need to know that somewhere in this world, there are still people who don't give up. We can't go back in time, but we can send a story so that the truth is not buried under the dust of oblivion. Send this story, because who knows, somewhere, someone is still waiting for someone to step forward.